Picture yourself clinging to a rope beneath a storm-tossed ship. Icy waves choking your lungs as the barnacle-crusted hull looms like a jagged beast ready to claim you. The year was 1712, and the HMS Relentless sliced through the roiling Atlantic. Its sails taut against a biting wind that howled like a banshee across the deck. Elias Thorne, a young sailor of 20 with sun-bleached hair and hands roughened by years of hauling hempen ropes, stood braced against the ship's rail, his eyes squinting against the sting of salt spray. The frigate, a towering fortress of oak and iron, groaned under the weight of towering waves that crashed over the bow, soaking the crew to their bones. Elias had joined the Navy 3 years prior, lured by tales of adventure in distant ports. But life aboard was a grind of endless labour, hunger and fear. The Relentless was a world apart, a floating prison where the captain's word was iron law, and the sea was both master and foe. Below deck, Elias shared a cramped mess with 40 other sailors, their hammocks swaying like cocoons in the dim flicker of lanterns that cast eerie shadows on the damp timbers. The air reeked of tar, sweat, and the sour tang of bilge water that sloshed in the ship's bowels. Meals were a grim affair. Hardtack so hard it cracked teeth, crawling with weevils that crunched unpleasantly, and salted pork that turned even the strongest stomachs. Grog, a watery mix of rum and lime, was their only solace, numbing the ache of sore muscles and empty bellies. Discipline was unrelenting. Captain Hargrove, a grizzled man with a scarred cheek and eyes like chipped flint, ruled with a ferocity that kept the crew in line. Elias had seen men flogged for dropping a tool or speaking out of turn, their cries swallowed by the wind, but whispers among the sailors spoke of a darker fate. Keelhauling, a punishment reserved for the worst crimes, mutiny, desertion, or theft from the ship's stores. Life aboard was a relentless battle against the elements. Storms could rage for days, the ship pitching wildly as waves taller than houses battered the hull. Elias climbed the mast during these tempests, his fingers numb from the cold, securing lines that snapped like whips in the gale. His closest mate, Jonah Black, a broad-shouldered sailor with a quick laugh and a faded anchor tattoo, shared stories of far-off lands, ports in the Caribbean where palm trees swayed and taverns brimmed with laughter. But beneath the camaraderie, tension simmered. Rations dwindled on long voyages, and the captain's paranoia about mutiny cast a shadow over the crew. Elias felt it in the way men whispered during the night watch, their eyes darting to the officer's cabin, where Hargrove hoarded extra supplies, casks of rum, dried fruits, even fresh meat, locked away while the crew starved. One stormy evening, as the sun sank in a blaze of crimson, Elias leaned against a cannon, polishing its barrel to a dull shine. Jonah joined him, his voice low. "The men are restless, Elias. Captain's sitting on a feast while we choke on rot. There's talk of taking what's ours." Elias's gut twisted. He'd heard the rumours, seen the hunger in his mate's eyes. The agog of the sea had taught him to survive, to knot ropes in blinding rain, to fire a musket under cannon smoke, but it hadn't prepared him for this. He thought of his village back in Cornwall, the quiet fields where he'd run as a boy, now a distant dream. The Relentless sailed deeper into hostile waters, chasing rumours of Spanish privateers, and Elias sensed a reckoning brewing. As he tied off a line, the hull below creaked, its barnacles a silent threat, waiting for the sea to claim its due. Under a star-studded sky, the Relentless rocked gently in a rare calm, the sea a glassy mirror reflecting the moon's pale glow. Below deck, in the stifling confines of the crew's quarters, Elias lay in his hammock, the creak of timbers mingling with the snores of exhausted men. Jonah's voice broke the quiet, urgent and low, as he leaned close, his breath sharp with grog. "We're done suffering, lad. Captain's got casks of rum, barrels of apples, cheese, locked in his stores while we gnaw on weevils. A quick raid, share it fair, and we'll eat like men again." Elias's heart thudded, torn between loyalty to the ship and the hunger clawing at his insides. The crew had endured scurvy that blackened gums, storms that nearly sank them, and the captain's relentless drills that left them bruised and weary. Mutiny was a forbidden word, but its promise hung heavy in the air. Over the next week, the plan took shape in hushed meetings during the dog watch, when officers slept and the ship was quiet save for the slap of waves. Elias, known for his nimble fingers from years of splicing ropes, was chosen to pick the lock on the captain's stores. Jonah would stand guard with old Grimes, a one-eyed veteran whose tales of pirate raids thrilled the younger men, and Finn, a nervous recruit with a boyish face and dreams of heroism. They gathered in the hold, a cavern of shadows filled with coils of rope, barrels of pitch, and the ever-present stink of bilge. Elias practiced on a rusted padlock, his hands steady despite the fear coiling like a snake in his chest. "One twist and we're in," he whispered, imagining the taste of sweet fruit, the warmth of rum after months of sour grog. The ship's course toward a Spanish colony promised resupply, but Captain Hargrove announced a detour to chase an enemy vessel, prolonging their misery. The crew's frustration boiled over, their whispers growing bolder. Elias felt the weight of their trust. He was no thief, but the thought of his mates' gaunt faces pushed him forward. One foggy night, under a waxing moon, the plotters moved. Jonah led them below, his anchor tattoo a faint shadow in the lantern light. Elias knelt before the locked door to the stores. A nail filed into a makeshift pick in his hand. The hold was a maze of crates and barrels, the air thick with the scent of tar and salt. His fingers worked the lock, sweat beading on his brow, the ship's groans masking the faint clicks. The lock gave way, and the door creaked open, revealing treasures, casks of rum, sacks of dried apples, wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth. Elias's heart soared, but as he reached for a sack, a floorboard groaned behind him. A lantern flared, and the boatswain's voice roared, "Thief!" The hold erupted. Shouts, boots thundering above, shadows converging. Elias dropped the sack, bolting for the ladder, but rough hands seized him. Jonah and Finn were dragged up from another passage, their faces pale, eyes wide with dread. On deck, the crew formed a silent circle under the captain's cold gaze. Hargrove's scarred face twisted as he spoke. Mutiny and theft. Crimes against the crown. His eyes swept the hull, barnacles glinting like knives in the moonlight. Rig the lines for keelhauling. The sea will judge them. Elias's knees buckled, the word echoing in his mind. The barnacled hull below a spectre of what awaited. Dawn painted the sky in streaks of grey and gold as the Relentless lay still, its sails furled, drifting in a calm sea. Elias stood on deck, ropes binding his wrists, the coarse fibres biting into his skin. Beside him, Jonah and Finn shivered, their faces drawn, the crew assembled in a grim semicircle. Captain Hargrove paced, his boots thudding like a drumbeat, his voice cutting through the morning chill. These men betrayed their ship, their king. Let the sea's justice cleanse their folly. Keelhauling. The word sent a shudder through Elias. He'd heard tales in port taverns, men dragged beneath the ship, their bodies scraped raw by barnacles, lungs screaming for air. The hull below was a jagged forest of shells, grown thick over months at sea, ready to tear flesh like paper. The crew moved with mechanical precision, rigging heavy ropes from bow to stern, their faces averted to avoid the condemned men's eyes. Elias was first, stripped to his breeches, a lead weight tied to his ankles to pull him deep. Jonah gripped his shoulder, his voice a low growl. "Hold your breath, lad. Fight the pull." Elias nodded, his mind flashing to his childhood. Running through Cornwall's fields, the smell of fresh hay, his mother's laughter. Now only the sea awaited. The boatswain looped a rope under his arms, its knots rough against his ribs. The ship slowed, the creak of timbers the only sound as the crew waited. "Over the side!" Hargrove barked, and hands lifted Elias, tipping him into the icy Atlantic. The water hit like a fist, cold and shocking, bubbles swirling as he sank. The rope jerked, dragging him under the bow. The ship's massive bulk a dark shadow above. Darkness closed in, the pressure squeezing his ears, his chest tightening. He kicked against the weight, holding his breath, his lungs already burning. The hull loomed, a wall of oak encrusted with barnacles, their edges sharp as broken glass in the dim light. Elias twisted, trying to shield his body, but the current pressed him close. Pain flared as his shoulder grazed the shells, blood clouding the water. He thrashed, panic clawing at him, the rope pulling him deeper along the keel, more barnacles raking his arms and legs. The sea was a roaring void, his heartbeat thundering, his vision blurring with black spots. He clawed at the water, desperate for relief, but the hull's curve pinned him, its jagged surface relentless. Memories flashed, Jonah's laugh, Finn's nervous grin, the smell of grog in the mess. His lungs screamed, bubbles escaping as he fought to hold on. The stern neared, light piercing the murk, and the rope yanked him upward. He broke the surface, gasping, coughing seawater, blood streaming from cuts. Rough hands hauled him aboard, dumping him on the deck, his body trembling. Jonah went next, his descent marked by a splash and silence, the crew's eyes fixed on the sea. Elias lay there, shivering, the barnacles' sting a fire in his skin, knowing the ordeal wasn't over. The deck of the HMS Relentless was a stage of grim silence as Jonah Black vanished beneath the waves, the splash of his descent swallowed by the vast Atlantic. Elias Thorne lay sprawled on the wet planks, his body a furnace of pain, each breath a struggle against the salt-stinging gashes that crisscrossed his arms, legs, and back. The barnacle's cruel embrace had left him battered, blood pooling in dark rivulets beneath him, soaking into the weathered oak. His vision swam, the faces of the crew blurred in the dawn light, their expressions a mix of horror, pity, and relief that it wasn't them. Finn, the youngest of the mutineers, stood trembling nearby, his boyish face drained of colour, his eyes wide with dread. "I can't do this," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the creak of the ship's timbers. But the boatswain, a burly man with a face like weathered leather, shoved him forward, securing the heavy ropes under Finn's arms with a practiced hand. Captain Hargrove's voice boomed across the deck, sharp as a cannon shot. "Let every man see the price of betrayal." Finn's gaze met Elias's, pleading for courage before he was tipped over the side, the sea claiming him with a muted splash. Below deck, Jonah fought the icy depths, the rope dragging him under the bow's massive curve like a fish hooked on a line. The water was a roaring chaos, cold as death, pressing against his chest with a force that threatened to crush his ribs. The hull loomed above, a dark, barnacle-encrusted wall that seemed to stretch forever, its jagged shells glinting faintly in the filtered light of the deep. Jonah twisted his body, trying to shield his face, but a sharp barnacle raked his thigh, pain exploding like a burst of lightning, followed by another across his arm. He gritted his teeth, counting heartbeats to anchor himself. 10, 20, 30, each thump a reminder to hold on. The pressure in his lungs was a fire, urging him to exhale, but he clamped his lips shut, bubbles streaming from his nose as he kicked against the lead weight tied to his ankles. He thought of his wife in Bristol, her warm smile in their cramped cottage, the way their young son's tiny hand had gripped his finger before he'd sailed. Those memories were a beacon, pulling him through the darkness. The keel's length was an eternity, each inch a battle against the hull's relentless surface. Another barnacle tore at his shoulder, blood clouding the water, the salt stinging like 1,000 needles. Jonah's vision blurred, black spots dancing at the edges, his chest screaming for air. He clawed at the water, fingers scraping against the hull, desperate to find purchase, but the rope pulled him onward, unyielding. The ship's curve began to rise toward the stern, light piercing the murky depths like a distant promise. He kicked harder, his muscles burning, his heart pounding a fierce rhythm of survival. Finally, he broke the surface, gasping, coughing seawater, his body a tapestry of pain. Rough hands hauled him aboard, dumping him beside Elias on the deck, his blood mingling with the salt water that puddled around them. Jonah's eyes, wild and bloodshot, met Elias's, a flicker of relief passing between them. They had survived, but the sea's judgment was not yet done. Finn's ordeal followed, his youth making it all the more harrowing. The boy thrashed wildly as the rope dragged him under, his slight frame no match for the current's pull. The barnacles claimed deep tolls, slicing his chest and arms, the water turning red around him. He fought with the desperation of someone too young to face such a trial, his kicks frantic, his lungs burning within moments. The hull's jagged surface seemed to mock him, each graze a lesson in the sea's indifference. Finn's mind raced with memories of his mother's voice, singing lullabies in their Devon village, a world so far from this watery hell. He burst to the surface, choking and sobbing, his cries piercing the air as the crew pulled him aboard. He collapsed beside Jonah and Elias, his body trembling, his face pale as death. The crew stood silent, some muttering prayers to old gods, others turning away, unable to meet the boy's haunted eyes. Captain Hargrove watched, his scarred face unyielding, his authority a cold weight over the ship. Elias reached for Jonah's hand, their fingers locking in a grip that spoke of shared survival. "We're alive," he rasped, his voice hoarse from salt water and pain. Jonah nodded, but his eyes were distant, fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky, as if searching for something lost beneath the waves. The ship's sails snapped as the wind picked up, the Relentless resuming its course, but the air was heavy with fear. The mutinous whispers that had sparked their crime were silenced, replaced by the weight of what they'd endured. As night fell, Elias was carried to the ship's surgeon, a grizzled man with a stained apron and a grim demeanour. In the flickering light of the orlop deck, crude stitches pulled at Elias's wounds, each tug a fresh agony, fever creeping into his bones. The barnacled hull below, silent and unforgiving, had tested them to their limits, leaving scars that ran deeper than flesh. Elias lay there, shivering, his mind replaying the descent, the pain, the fight for breath, knowing that survival was only the beginning. Weeks had passed since the Keelhauling, and the HMS Relentless lay anchored in a bustling Caribbean port, its weathered hull scraped clean in dry dock, the barnacles that had marked Elias, Jonah, and Finn now gone, though their legacy lingered in the jagged scars that crisscrossed the sailors' bodies. Elias moved with a careful gait, his wounds healed but his muscles stiff, each step a reminder of the sea's harsh embrace. His arms, legs, and back bore a lattice of raised pink scars, a map of survival that drew glances from the crew, some pitying, some fearful, others tinged with grudging respect. The tale of their ordeal had spread through the ship like wildfire, whispered in the mess over bowls of thin stew, recounted in hushed tones during the night watch. Elias, Jonah, and Finn had faced the keel and lived, a feat that made them legends among the sailors, though the cost was etched in their eyes. The port was a riot of colour and sound, palm trees swaying in the warm breeze, merchants hawking spices and rum, the clatter of carts on cobblestone streets. The Relentless, its hull freshly painted, gleamed under the tropical sun, but Elias felt no joy in it. He stood at the rail one evening, the sunset painting the sea in hues of gold, crimson, and deep indigo, the waves lapping gently against the ship. Jonah joined him, his broad frame still strong despite the scars that marred his tattooed arm, his laugh quieter now, but still carrying the warmth that had first drawn Elias to him. "We were fools, Elias," Jonah said, his voice rough but steady, the words carrying the weight of their shared trial. "Thought we'd outsmart the captain, outsmart the sea, but she don't forgive easy." Elias nodded, his fingers tracing a scar on his wrist, the memory of the hull's dark embrace vivid. The cold grip of water, the scrape of barnacles, the terror of drowning. Finn, no longer the eager boy who joined the plot, stood nearby, his eyes scanning the horizon with a new steadiness. The keelhauling had aged him, his boyish grin replaced by a quiet resolve, his hands steady as he tied knots or polished brass. The crew had resumed their duties, Elias hauling lines with practiced hands, Jonah climbing the rigging with the ease of a man born to the sea, Finn studying charts under the navigator's watchful eye. Captain Hargrove, his authority cemented by the punishment, had eased rations, barrels of fresh apples, smoked fish, and even a cask of rum shared among the crew, a gesture that felt like mercy after months of hardship. The mutiny's shadow had lifted, but the memory of that dawn on the deck lingered, a silent pact among the survivors. Elias found purpose in the ship's rhythm, loading cannons with precision, mending sails torn by storms, standing watch under skies thick with stars. He thought often of the lock he'd picked, the cask of rum they'd never tasted, the moment the boatswain's lantern had flared. The barnacles had left their mark, but so had survival, forging him into something new. One night, as the Relentless sailed under a crescent moon, Elias and Jonah sat in the mess, sharing a rare loaf of fresh bread from the port. Finn joined them, his voice soft but firm. "I see it when I close my eyes," he admitted, his fingers tracing the scars on his arm. "The hull, the water. But I'm still here." Jonah clapped his shoulder, a rare smile breaking through. "We all are, lad. The sea tested us, and we answered." Years later, Elias rose to boatswain, his voice steady as he called orders across the deck, his scars a badge of endurance that silenced younger sailors' complaints. Jonah became a master rigger, his hands sure on the lines, scaling masts with a grace that belied his scars. Finn, now a navigator, charted courses through treacherous waters, his maps guiding the Relentless to victory against privateers and storms. The hull, cleaned and repainted, held no more terror, but its lesson lingered, a whisper in the waves that had shaped them into men who could face any challenge. Elias stood at the helm one dawn, the sea stretching endless before him, and felt a quiet pride. The barnacled hull had been a crucible, burning away their folly and forging them into sailors loyal to the ship, the sea, and each other, ready for whatever horizons lay ahead.